listening to an Iraq Currency Watch podcast. You're listening to an Iraq Currency Watch podcast. Here's Marcus Curtis and Sam I Am.
Well, the GCR is being used to
Right.
to promote the sales. But as I mentioned, I think earlier, I had a chance to read because I did a little bit of proofreading for you. I got a chance to read through the whole book before you released your revised version. And there's two things in particular that I've just found fascinating that I think most people don't understand. One was the history of money, and the other was the history of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
Why don't you just for a few minutes just touch on the history of money and the history of the Federal Reserve, because there's a lot of misconceptions regarding both.
Yeah, I remember watching a video, I think it was Mike Maloney, and it said that the Federal Reserve is an institution that wasn't that our founding fathers would never have agreed on. And I've heard it some other places too, where they say the Federal Reserve is not anything our founding fathers would agree on. The truth is, the first Federal Reserve was written and signed into law by George Washington, and Alexander Hamilton was the treasurer at the time. It had a 20-year charter, and at the end of the charter, they didn't renew that charter. Then we entered the War of 1812, and after the War of 1812, they chartered another central banking system with another 20-year charter. Andrew Jackson became president, and he didn't like the central banking system. He was kind of a Donald Trump kind of guy, I guess you could say. But he didn't like he had wild hair too, but he didn't like yeah, his hair was crazy. But he didn't like the central banking system, so he campaigned against it. And he was going to not renew its charter. And so he campaigned on the slogan, Jackson and no bank. And he was a Democrat. And his opponents changed that slogan to Jackass and no bank. And the donkey became the official symbol of the Democratic Party ever since that time. But after the charter of the second central bank wasn't renewed, we entered something called the free banking era. And during that time, states dealt with all the money laws all the way up until 1960s. And in 1963, around that time, Lincoln tried to get a loan.
1863.
I'm sorry. I say 1863, right? I'm dyslexic sometimes.
I thought you were fast forwarding to Kennedy and Johnson.
Oh, no. 1863, Lincoln wants to finance the war. They're looking for a way to finance the war. So he goes to New York bankers to figure out a way to finance this war. And they want to charge him 22% all the way up to 31% interest for different loans that will finance the war. So he's trying to figure out what to do here. He doesn't want to take the loans. And so what winds up happening is he pushes through the Legal Tender Act. This is the first formation of federal laws since the free banking era. And he printed his own currency to fund the war. And it was called greenbacks because of the green ink on the back of the currency. And he started the Secret Service to find counterfeiters. And anybody counterfeiting the currency would be arrested through the Secret Service. And anything dealing with the enforcement of money law was done through the Secret Service. And then after Lincoln passed away, their role expanded to protecting the president. But we went into a national system of banking after the Civil War. And this lasted for a while. Gold was still used as money. Silver was still used as money. There were a series of contraction measures that were passed to dwindle down the greenbacks. I'm going past a lot of information here, but then you get into the 1900s, and we have problems with banks. We had the banker panic of 1907. Banks are failing. They're a run on the banks, and it's because people are hoarding gold, and there are some other things about these banks that people are having problems with, and so people are crying out for a fix for the system. Woodrow Wilson campaigned on banking reform, and so did Aldrich and a few other people. And it was a hot topic in that day. In 1910, that was the big deal, was banking reform. And they took over. Wilson took over, and he signed the Federal Reserve Act into law, 1913. And, whenever you create a central bank, you need a way to funnel money into the central bank. And so the IRS was created that same year, and which funnels money into the Federal Reserve when you pay your taxes. This to back the loans from the Federal Reserve. Now, Washington did a similar thing because under the first central bank, whiskey was taxed to pay for that first central bank. And a rebellion broke out known as the Whiskey Rebellion. I would just say to people, go ahead and Google it and read about it. And all these people started marching, and then Washington showed up with troops, and they all disbanded. So read about the Whiskey Rebellion. It was based on the first central bank, and it was based on financing the first central bank. So as time went on, we entered the Great Depression in the 1929 under Hoover. Hoover was president, and he put in Keynesian economic principles, which didn't help at all. And then Roosevelt won after that, and he began to change things, and he outlawed the use of gold. And after that, there was a bunch of banking reforms that passed. 1934 was the first one. It was the Glass-Steagall, which really reinforced. 1935 was a rewrite of the Federal Reserve. They should have called it maybe the New Federal Reserve or something, because it's totally different than what passed in 1913. It gave controlling power to the Treasury Department for the Federal Reserve. Also, the ESF was set up as a result. So there was 3 years of major banking reform and major banking laws that were passed by Congress from 33 on up. And then as time went on, of course, we had Bretton Woods, and then the removal of Bretton Woods in 1971. And then we get into 1973, and they set up the petrodollar system. Now, the petrodollar system is interesting. It's one of the reasons why our dollar is strong around the world today. And the way the petrodollar system works is pretty simple. They removed us from the Bretton Woods system, and they knew that globally the money really didn't have too much value. I mean, in America, it was a government law, government decree that gave it its value. But outside of the United States, people were still using dollars, but it wasn't really backed by gold. So they set up this petrodollar system. And the way it works is they went to Saudi Arabia, was the first nation to sign on to this, and then others soon followed. And what they said is just sell your oil in dollars only. Don't accept any other currency. And if you do this, then a couple of things will happen. First, we will protect you with our military. Anybody that attacks you is an attack on the United States. We will rise up and protect you. Number two, you will become wealthy. You will become wealthy beyond your dreams. All you got to do is sell oil in dollars. So Saudi Arabia agreed to sign on to this, and other nations followed. So soon after that, all oil was sold only in dollars. And these nations that did this had the promise of military protection by the United States, which is the reason for the Gulf War to begin with, because when Saddam entered Kuwait, Kuwait sold their oil in dollars. We had to go to defend. And if we did not, then we'd be in violation of the petrodollar agreement, and we'd be in jeopardy of all these nations forsaking the use of the sale of oil using dollars. Okay, so if you're a nation, let's say you're Japan or somebody like that, and you don't have oil in your country, you have to find a way to get oil in your country. And so what do? Well, you can take yen and you can exchange that yen for US dollars, and then you can use that to go buy your oil, and then you accumulate a lot of debt. Or you can build Americans a Nintendo, a PlayStation, a Honda, a Nissan, a Datsun back then, and import that into America and take the tax from that export, and then go buy your oil with that. So all these countries needed U.S. jobs to fund the sale of oil, and so it was in 1973 when jobs began to be exported and jobs began to leave America. The first ones to leave were the textile industries, the clothing manufacturers. They all went overseas. They were the first ones to go, and so America began to lose its manufacturing base from 1973 on up. Then it accelerated under Clinton because before Clinton left office, he signed on with the World Trade Center. He got China to be a member of the World Trade Organization. That's what he did. And as a result of that, a lot of jobs have exported now to China. And so all these nations want to export to America to get dollars so they can buy their oil. And that's the thing that brought the global economy into existence and really strengthened it. Bretton Woods came along and created the structure of the global economy. And the petrodollar system fortified it and made it grow. And today we're in a global marketplace. And if you...
So right about the time that we, of the Nixon shock, when we no longer would redeem U.S. dollars for gold to other countries. About the same time, we created value or demand for the U.S. dollar internationally by creating the petrodollar system.
Right. And basically, other nations basically sell their oil in dollars, and that is what created the petrodollar system in exchange for military protection and wealth. Now, think about this and follow it to its logical conclusion. In order for there to be a global currency reset, you have to deal with this petrodollar system. If these guys stop selling oil in dollars, they have no military protection. It's gone.
Right.
And if they stop selling oil in dollars, all the wealth they've accumulated since the 70s is gone. If the dollar becomes worthless, all of their wealth is also gone. It's also wiped out. See, if you wipe out the U.S. dollar, you wipe out global wealth, not just America's wealth, global wealth.
Right. But you will hear a lot of these people say that the petrodollar system is history.
It's not history.
That everybody's leaving the petrodollar system.
Who's leaving it?
That's what they say.
Who's leaving it? Name one person leaving it. Name one country. Saudi Arabia is still doing it, as far as I know. They're one of the main key players. I know Venezuela did under Hugo Chavez. There was a problem there for a little while. Iraq switched from selling oil in dollars to euros in 2001, but today, I mean, they sell it in dollars. They switched back.
I think Iran is probably the largest, or maybe the only oil economy that doesn't sell its oil for U.S. dollars.
Yeah, but Iran is still operating under sanctions to a certain degree. It was only recently that it had been lifted. I mean, Saddam switched from selling oil from dollars to euros because he couldn't handle the sanctions. There was no way for that man to get stuff into his country that he needed. So he started selling oil in euros to use the euro for a way to import goods that the country desperately needed. They had the Oil for Food program at the time. Do you remember that? And he used that program to get all kinds of weapons and stuff in as well. And that's what about the time, in 2001 is when he made the switch, 2000, somewhere in there. And I don't know the exact date. I know it's in the book. I don't remember what it is. But he switched at that point, and then we made invasion plans. And then when we got in there, the first order of business was switching it back to the dollar. But look, we've been out of Iraq for all this time, and they have not switched it back to the euro, have they?
No.
They have not switched it back at all. Iran still sells, if they sell in euros, is because it's not because they're trying to hurt our currency. It's because they can't get our currency because of sanctions.
Well, there was talk that Russia wanted to get away from the petrodollar system.
Oh, yeah, sure they do.
And did Libya try it?
Libya tried it under Gaddafi. What they basically did is they had two oil summits. And basically they wanted to combine all the Arab nations together to where they can sell oil using this gold dinar thing that Gaddafi cooked up. Okay? And it was just basically selling gold. We need gold for oil. Now, America has enough oil where if they wanted to tap into the resources, we don't really need to import oil. But we keep our oil under wraps here to a certain degree because of the petrodollar system. If the market gets flooded, it has an effect on the petrodollar system. These nations are making money by selling their oil in dollars. When they don't generate wealth by selling their oil in dollars anymore, they're going to think of another way to do this. So that's why oil drilling in America is limited. I mean, but the politicians cover that up. One side says it's not environmentally friendly, and the other side says that the Democrats won't let them drill because they're nuts. But the truth of the matter is the petrodollar system is in play, and that's why the drilling is not done. If we really needed oil, we could tap into a lot more resources here in America if we really needed it bad. But these other nations, they drill for it and they sell it, and that's how their economies go. Now Russia completely collapsed in the 1990s. Their whole economy collapsed when communism collapsed. Their whole recovery was based on the export of oil that they have in their country, and that's how they recovered. They pipe natural gas into Europe. Russia sells us oil.
Right.
I've been in the airports in Oklahoma, and I've seen big old airplanes land that are from Russia that deal with transporting oil parts back and forth from the country. And they have experts that go over there. Russia exports a bunch of oil. We buy a bunch of oil from Russia. A lot of people are not even aware of that.
Yeah.
And
so we have to really maintain a balance between energy independence and collapsing the economies of the countries that use the petrodollar.
right, because all the economies are backed by this petrodollar system. You look any oil producing economy, be it Iraq, Iran, or any of them out there, the price of oil is basically in dollars. Now the euro, you notice what Iraq did. They exchanged all their euro for gold. And a lot of the gold that Iraq has is used to be euros at one point. It's because they recognize the euro is having issues right now, from the European sovereign debt crisis all the way up. And this is covered in the book a little bit too. But there's a lot of countries that are suffering. I mean, we just had Brexit right now. We had Cyprus and the events that happened there. There's a lot of events I'm kind of skimming over, but the euro, I think, is in big trouble right now. And these nations that are repatriating their gold, we talked about this a little bit earlier, they're all European nations. Now, what the global currency reset people will tell you is that, they're repatriating their gold from the Federal Reserve because the dollar is worthless and the dollar is going to crash. But what they won't tell you is that Austria also repatriated gold from London. I found it as I was searching the internet. So the London Central Bank that was holding gold for Austria had to give that gold back to Austria. So it's not just the Federal Reserve these European countries are getting their gold back from. There's central banks from around the world that are holding gold that's being returned to Europe. Now, why are these nations asking for their gold back?
Because we're going to go back to the gold standard, Marcus.
Oh, that could be. Could be we're going back to the gold standard. It could be that the euro is in trouble and these nations might have to come up with their own currency again.
Yeah, I know that's what people will tell you, is that they're all stocking up on gold because they understand that the dollar is going to collapse and we're going to go back to the gold standard. Now, you made some interesting points about, was it India and China, and how they're accumulating gold. not necessarily for their banking system.
No, they're accumulating gold because they're the number one manufacturer in the world. Now, China has increased its gold supply. That's not in question at all. And you can go to Trading Economics and you can see how much gold China has. And they were at 1,000 tons, and now they're at like 1,800 tons. But still, when they were at 1,000 tons, they had 120 trillion renminbi. And that 1,000 tons represented 2% of their money supply. Now that they're at 1,800 tons, they're at 151 trillion renminbi and growing. And it's still right around 2% of their money supply is being represented. So as their dollar supply is growing, well, I say dollar supply, I mean as their currency supply is growing, so is their gold. So it's still right around 2%. That backs their currency. Also, a lot of the gold that's being imported to China, the what's not making it into the central bank, is going to manufacturing because computers, electronics, all these things require massive amounts of gold and silver to work. Computer chips have gold in them. There's a lot of gold in different types of electronic circuits. So gold is used in industry, and so is silver. And all these metals going to China, they use it for industry more so than they use it to back their currency. Some of it is going to back their currency, no doubt, but not all of it. And the implication that all of it is going to back their currency is a misnomer. That's not true at all. India slapped a duty on jewelry coming into their nation because they're the number one export of jewelry. And they want the precious metal because they want to produce jewelry and export it to the world. And that's why they slapped a duty on gold going back into India. They don't want that jewelry back. They want to export it. So, and only 17.8% of the world's gold supply is in in central banks around the world. The Federal Reserve has the most out of all of them. So, China is basically acquiring gold for two reasons. One, for industry, and one, they are putting some of it in their central bank. But they would have you believe that everything's going to the central bank. I mean, and the other thing about repatriating that I would say, and this is a valid question, how come the European countries are the only ones that are repatriating their gold? Why is that?
Because so many of them are using the euro.
Exactly right. They're maybe they're just being cautious. Maybe they're being cautious,
and maybe they think that there's going to be more fallout in the European Union, like Brexit.
Like Brexit, yeah, like Cyprus. But what's interesting to me is I was looking at Brexit. There's 27 to 29, somewhere in there. I don't know the exact number, but somewhere around there, countries that are in the Eurozone. Out of all those countries in the Eurozone, 17 of them use the euro. If you are a member of this Eurozone, you are subject to the trade laws of the Eurozone. When you have a nation like China that suppresses their currency value so they can export more, how are you going to compete as a nation when you're subjected to these European laws? If you were a nation, you were a sovereign nation, not a part of this Eurozone, you can come up with your own trade policy without regard for what the rest of Europe wants you to do. See,
right?
And that's the thing. So we see Brexit as a means of providing more stability for Britain. So we'll see what happens with all that. But
Now, another thing that I was asking you about earlier is the Federal Reserve. When people say that the Federal Reserve is it's a huge problem and we need to end the Federal Reserve and just issue U.S. Treasury notes and things like that, you brought out in your book the value of the Federal Reserve System. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. So if I can remember that. Yeah, there's one chapter in the book where we talk about all the different entities and how they're all connected together and how everything works. And the Federal Reserve, people say it's a private bank, but it's private in the sense it's not like other central banks. Not the same definition of private that other central banks hold throughout the world. The central bank has a 12 board member, and 2 of the seats on this board are congressional seats. The chairman is chosen by the president, and they're not private in the same sense that other central banks are private. They have to answer the Congress. Now, they're private in the sense where there's kind of an institution inside of government, and they're a non-profit, but they make a profit every year. And everything they make has to be turned over to the United States government. And they turn over billions of dollars to the United States every year off the profit they make.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Yeah, I was amazed. You showed me a video of Ben Bernanke.
Oh yeah,
and was that when he was talking with Ron Paul?
He
or
was talking
was
to Ron Paul, and it was a Jay Sloan article he was quoting. It was $140 billion they turned over to the U.S. government in a period of a few years, and that was profit that the Federal Reserve brought or made, but they had to surrender that. They're not allowed to make a profit. That's some of the reforms.
I had no idea about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I stumbled upon that when I was doing research, and I was like, wow. And I looked it up, and I began to dig in that area. Google is amazing. You can find out all kinds of things in Google.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they make a profit every year. They're a government institution, but they're private in the sense that they don't answer to Congress, they don't answer to the president, and they don't answer to the Supreme Court. They issue monetary policy without regard to these guys that would use it for political gain. And that's the way they designed it in 1913. Because one of the problems they had under the gold standard was that the politicians would manipulate certain aspects of the money supply for political gain. And when they wanted to reform the bank, that's one thing they wanted to get away with. They wanted to get away from that. And
yeah, but the Federal Reserve is not owned by the Bilderbergers or the international banking cartel.
No.
Yeah, those are some of the...
There are banks that have stock in the Federal Reserve. If you look at the system, there are banks that have stock, and the stock does pay a dividend. Okay, and these banks that are plugged in are the same people. If you look at how it works, these banks go and they buy T-bills from the government. And they take these T-bills and they go back to the Federal Reserve and they sell it to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve issues the Federal Reserve notes that the banks could then use to put in circulation. That's how money is created. And we cover all of this in the book.
In the book. Let me just say, folks, this book is incredible. Marcus goes back into the history of money all the way back to the days of the Bible. And then he shows you how the coins that were used in the Roman Empire were debased, the Greek drachma, I think, and then all through history there have been problems with managing the money system and inflation. This is not something that's just unique to America and the last few centuries. This has been the history of money for thousands of years. And then he goes into all the misconceptions regarding the Federal Reserve. He talks about the colonial script and Lincoln. He talks about all kinds of things that people will not tell you in these gold and precious metal circles and foreign currency schemes. You don't hear about these things.
And the reason why you don't is because it would affect their sales. When you learn the truth, you're no longer living in fear, and it would definitely affect your sales. So if you sell gold and silver, you don't want to read my book because you wouldn't make any money.
Right.
So,
but this is a valuable resource. If you want to get, if you've got any interest in purchasing precious metals or exotic foreign currencies like the dinar, the dong, the renminbi, what's the other one? Oh, people have been buying, believe it or not, the Zimbabwe dollar.
Yeah, that's funny.
Which is not even a currency anymore.
It's been demonetized. And then now Zimbabwe, what do they use for their currency now?
Well, they use the U.S. dollar and some other. I guess they're using some like hybrid thing with bonds. I don't know.
Well, what they have is bond coins, and the reason why they have bond coins is because the United States has all this currency they exported, and Zimbabwe right now is using the dollar. The dollar is their king. Now, if the dollar crashes, they're in serious trouble because they don't have their own currency. Okay, and they're using the dollar. Now, what the problem is in exporting this currency is that the United States doesn't have enough coins to go around. They can't produce enough coins to export to nations around the world. So they do electronic currency, number one, but they also have the paper currency that has been in central banks since the Bretton Woods era. Okay, so what Zimbabwe wants to make change, because everything costs a lot less in Zimbabwe than it costs over here, and they need a way to make change. So what they do is they take U.S. dollars and they put it in their bank, and they issue these bond coins that are based off the dollars that are held in their central bank. And the reason why they do the bond coin thing is because that's the only way they can create coins to make change for the American currency that they use.
Right.
But, Zimbabwe went the way, it was just like Ecuador, Argentina, These guys, they spend into oblivion. They spend. And then their fiat currency collapses, which is what these GCR people will point to. And they're right. I mean, if you abuse a fiat currency or a currency from government decree, there's only so much you can put into circulation before your economy collapses. But that doesn't mean everything was rosy under the gold standard either.
Right.
You don't go back to a standard that left a lot of people in poverty, thinking that it's as pure as the driven snow.
And then the banks collapsed every 5 years.
Yeah, 70 banks on average would fail a year.
I just looked it up right before we started the podcast, Marcus. Do you know how many banks in the United States failed last year?
How many?
1.
Yeah.
So if you want to go back to that system, fine.
Yeah.
You're going to have to accept the consequences
Of that system, yeah.
Right.
Plus, there's not enough gold. I mean, look at this. I mean, we have over an $80 trillion economy. And the reason why these guys are predicting $5,000, $10,000 an ounce gold prices is because they're trying to take the gold supply that's in the central banks and what little gold they can gather up around the world, and they're trying to put all that gold in a value of an $80 trillion economy. The problem is there's not enough gold to go back to a gold standard without throwing 2/3 of the globe in poverty.
Right, because the population has grown and the gold supply has not grown proportionately.
Right, exactly. There's just not enough gold to go around for everybody. You'll be throwing 2/3 of the globe into poverty by going back to a gold standard. It's just not enough gold. It's not going to happen. And it wasn't a perfect system anyway. It's perfect. These guys are touting it as. It never was. But anyway, we were talking about Rome a little while ago. It's interesting when you do run the data on that in the first century. Rome started to mix other alloys with their coins, and their coins are basically silver. And by the time you get up to 250 AD, Rome had 5% silver in their coins, and basically it was a coating that wore off on the outside of the coin. And by that time, most of the coins were basically made from these other metals with a little silver coating around it. So 5% of their coins were silver. And they did this to increase their money supply so they can fortify armies and grow the empire. But all they really did was introduce inflation. And Rome entered into something as a result called the crisis of the 3rd century. You can Google it and find out what happened in the crisis of the 3rd century. Rome almost collapsed as a nation during that time. Part of the reason was the debasement of their money supply. There are real issues with the money supply that need to be addressed. Having massive amounts of debt is not a good thing. $20 trillion in debt is not good. So there are things that need to be addressed, and global currency people point these out, and rightly so. But at the same time, you can't say that we're going to go back to a gold standard or silver, or use silver as currency again, or that we're going to return to some former standard. That's not going to happen either, because that's not a solution. these things need to be addressed. But there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of hype, and there's a lot of untruth. And I wrote this book, The Truth About the Coming Global Currency Reset, to set the record straight. And it just gives you a basic foundation, and you can go from there. Where money is going and what money is going to look like in the future is anyone's guess. No one knows. And if someone claims that they know, they don't know what they're talking about. No one knows what money is going to be like in the future, in the immediate future anyway. We're not going to go back to some gold standard that wasn't good for anybody. We're not going to go back to some way we used to do things. Right now, we're running off the remnants, the remains of Bretton Woods, and it's functioning. There's some things that need to be addressed, but it'll be fixed in time. The only thing that could cause some sort of reset globally is some kind of world war that would break out, just like World War II. That would be the only thing that I could see, or that would cause something like this to come about. But for the most part, people who do this fear mongering about the debt, and then they say that the dollar is going to collapse. One of the things they don't realize is that debt is monetized. You're talking about $20 trillion debt, and on that $20 trillion is basically monetized. Debt becomes money, and money is debt. And not all money. We have a base money supply that's backed by assets, but it's expanded through the debt process. It's amazing. During the 2008 meltdown, there's a lot of debt that was removed from the books, and $11 trillion in wealth was lost by families. Now, this is not $11 trillion of currency. This is $11 trillion worth of wealth that was lost by American families, and a lot of money was erased from the books after the 2008 meltdown. Oh, and another thing that these guys will do is they point to events in history, and they totally misrepresent what caused those events in order to further their agenda. They will tell you that in the 70s inflation happened because they printed too much currency. When you can read up about it, it's actually the oil embargo that caused the inflation in the 70s. And the 2008 meltdown was because there was too much currency, when it was actually a loosening of banking restrictions by subprime mortgages, which was mandated by the government. Mm-hmm. And I got a whole chapter that covers the 2008 meltdown, why it happened, what happened, and what caused the whole thing. So it wasn't the currency supply that caused the 2008 meltdown. It was a lot of other things that came into play. But
a lot of government incompetence.
A lot of government incompetence, yes. When they try to issue subprime mortgages through their GSEs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and these kind of things. But also, I would like to say at this point that there's a website that I just got done putting together for the book called The Truth About the Coming Global Currency Reset. You can go to the website and click on the link and read the first portion of the book. But the website basically will give you all the details about all the articles on Iraq Currency Watch that talk about the global currency reset. If you still, at this point, I don't want to go out and get this book, I don't want to read this, that's fine. All the information, a lot of the information in the book, outside of some of the history, is you can read about on Iraq Currency Watch. We cover a lot of the information that's in this book. Also, the new website covers some information that is not on Iraq Currency Watch. And between the two, you can basically get an understanding of what this global currency reset is.
What's the domain name?
The domain name is globalcurrencyresetfacts.com. That's www.globalcurrencyresetfacts.com. I'll put a link down here underneath the podcast so that you can go to it and see it. But you can read up on this a little bit further, and then you can make your own decisions. I'm not, like I said in the beginning of this thing, don't take my word for anything. Do your own research, just like you would invest in anything else. Do your own research. Now, I also want to say at this point, I don't frown on gold and silver investments. I have silver and I have gold. I do have some precious metals. But I don't invest in these metals because the world is going to end. I don't invest in these metals because the dollar is going to become worthless. I invest in these metals because they're an asset and they're a way of protecting wealth to a certain degree. But gold and silver investments in and of themselves is not a bad thing. And so don't get that impression. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. But if
you need to buy it for the right reasons, and you
right.
need to buy a reasonable amount.
Right. Chances are, if you are buying gold and silver because you believe the dollar is going to crash, chances are you are over leveraging. And I've seen people over leverage. They sell all this stuff to go out and buy foreign currencies. I work with a guy who took money out of his 401k loan, and he went and got 18 million dinar because it was going to revalue. I know people that went out and bought a lot of gold and a lot of silver simply because the dollar was going to crash, and they were so sure the dollar was going to crash. If this is your investment information and you're getting your investment information from conspiracy theorists, then you're going to over leverage. You're going to buy too much, and you're not investing for the right reasons. The dinar is an investment scam. Gold and silver is not. But if you're buying it because the world is going to end, you are buying it for the wrong reasons. And if the world does end, what are you going to do with your gold and silver anyway? I mean, really. I mean, you're better off buying food or...
The aliens will confiscate it all.
Yeah, they'll confiscate it all. I mean, shoot, buy some alcohol. Have a good time. Go out with a bang. The world's going to end. I know. Let's buy gold and silver. Because that will save us. Yeah, it's ludicrous.
You can't eat precious metals.
Nope, sure can't. Sure can't. And, food will be more valuable than precious metal will be. Alcohol actually will be more valuable than precious metal because people will use it for sanitizing things, I guess, and medical reasons. But if the world's going to end, gold and silver is not going to do you much good. So it's only used as a medium of exchange because people trusted it at one point as a medium of exchange. And what you're betting on is that in the future, somebody's going to use it as a medium of exchange again, and that's when I'm going to be able to cash in. That's some wild speculation. It really is. All right, well, we're going to wrap this up, Sam. And it's been a great Iraq Currency Watch podcast. It's been a while since we did one of these things.
Yeah, well, we both got other projects going on, but it's nice to stay in touch with the currency investment or speculation community a little bit, because I think we both felt an obligation when we discovered that the dinar is a scam. We could have just packed up our tent and moved on, but I think we both felt like we had an obligation to take what we knew and try to right the wrongs of the past when we talked it up.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, I think that at this point that the dinar is dying a slow death. The investment of it is anyway. People are beginning to realize the scam nature of this thing. Finally. And it has taken a while, but people are beginning. And I think in time people will realize the same thing about the gold and silver and some of the other things. But this business of an any minute overnight dollar crash is ludicrous. These nations are not going to allow the dollar to crash along with their wealth. That's an interesting case story, though, Sam, is what happened during the Saddam era. When the dinar, when was cut off, and he was selling dinar, he was exporting it, and getting people to buy the dinar, saying that after the sanctions are lifted, the dinar will revalue and gain value. And he was selling the Swiss dinar. This is dinar that was printed in Switzerland by De La Rue. And so he was selling this dinar, and it had his face on it. But then he started printing other dinar from China. And this dinar wasn't very good. The ink ran on it. It would tear easily. There was no security features in it. It was easy to counterfeit. So he would import this dinar, and then he would sell the De La Rue dinar. And he exported 25 billion dinar. People from Jordan, all over the place bought it. Jordan was the main purchaser of it, though. And common citizens bought it. We're not talking about the government of Jordan. We're talking about people in Jordan. And then in 1993, Saddam invalidated the Swiss dinar. He closed the borders, and he invalidated the Swiss dinar, and he allowed a 2-week exchange period. And after the 2-week exchange period expired, he opened up the borders again. And all these people were mad from all over the world that bought this stuff, And so the same thing is happening again, a newer version of it. But what was interesting is that the Kurds weren't allowed to trade in their dinar. They still had the Swiss dinar. So they would use it as exchange among themselves because it's the only thing they had. They didn't have anything else to use. And so they used the dinar to exchange with. And then after America came in and the new dinar was printed, they allowed the Kurds to trade in those dinar notes they were using, and they got a higher value on those notes than the Chinese dinar got, because they knew that those notes were authentic and they had security features in them. But all that to say that, these countries, even if the dollar were to crash, as these guys say, you got Ecuador, you got Zimbabwe, and other countries that use the dollar because they don't have their own currency.
Bermuda,
they'll still continue to use the dollar because that's all they have. That's all they have. They won't have anything else. So, it's amazing to me. But anyway, we'll wrap this up. Thank you, Sam, for participating in this podcast.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you in the next podcast from Iraq Currency Watch.
See ya.
You're listening to an Iraq Currency Watch podcast. This is a production of Iraq Currency Watch. Any views expressed by guests of this show may not reflect the views of Iraq Currency Watch or the host. The views expressed by the host are opinions reached after countless hours of research and years of exposure to the Dinar community. We ask that everyone do their own research regarding any investment, including the Dinar. Thank you for listening to this podcast from Iraq Currency Watch.